Good day. Over the last few weeks, I have been discussing on videos in this program this prospective summit meeting between President Putin of Russia and President Biden of the United States, which is due to take place in Geneva on Wednesday, 16th June 2021. That is to say, in just a few days. I have suggested over the course of these programs, which I've done for this channel, that the purpose of this summit meeting is twofold. Firstly, it is to de-escalate the situation with Russia in Europe so as to allow the United States to focus on its confrontation with the Chinese in the Pacific. The other intention is to create fissures in the Russian-Chinese alliance. Well, we've now had a very interesting article in Washington Examiner, which is based on discussions with senior US officials, especially and specifically Jake Sullivan, who is President Biden's national security advisor. And this is now fully confirmed. First of all, I will quote directly the most important section from the article in Washington Examiner, and then I will discuss a few other things like this vexed question of the press conference, which is causing so much attention at the moment. But this is the part of the article in Washington Examiner based on what Jake Sullivan said, which I consider to be the most important. By the way, a readout of Sullivan's discussions with the journalists, which is reported in the Washington Examiner article, has not yet appeared in the White House website, but I expect that it will do so soon. This is what the relevant section of the Washington Examiner article says. Biden and senior White House officials have described the intent of the meeting as sending several warnings to Putin over the ransomware attacks by Russia-based groups, his massing of troops along his border with Ukraine, the misinformation campaigns in the United States and elsewhere, and other aggressive actions. Biden will also likely press Putin on joining the G7 nations' just announced international infrastructure initiative aimed at pushing back on China's influence in the global community. Sullivan on Monday told reporters that Biden plans to press Putin to help him provide a check on China, which is a big ask since Moscow and Beijing are aligned against Washington and the West on many issues. The new G7 agreement, dubbed Build Back Better World by Biden and his allies, will direct hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure investment for low and middle income countries that need it. This is not about making countries choose between us and China, an official said. This is about offering an affirmative alternative vision and approach that they would want to choose. Notice the extraordinary way that it's not about making countries choose between us and China, and then the next sentence confirms that it is in fact about offering an alternative, a choice to other countries between themselves and China. But never mind. Let's unpack the crucial points in this readout, in this article, which deal with the question of China and Russia and the United States. Firstly, there are the threats. So we read that Biden is going to give Putin warnings over the ransomware attacks by Russia or Russia-based groups, whatever that means, about the Russian troops that were stationed along the border with Ukraine, about the alleged misinformation campaigns in the United States and elsewhere, and other aggressive actions. I call them threats. The US, of course, says that they're warnings, but the Russians will interpret them as threats. And then, after the threats, comes the bribe. Biden will also likely press Putin on joining the G7 nations' just announced international infrastructure initiative aimed at pushing back on China's influence in the global community. And so hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure investment for low and middle income countries that need it. In other words, if you push back on China for us and provide a check on China, we will give you lots of money in the form of infrastructure aid. And if you don't, well, we will follow through on all those warnings about ransomware attacks, massing of troops along the Ukraine border, misinformation campaigns, aggressive actions elsewhere, you name it, almost certainly with more sanctions. It could not be more straightforward. It could also hardly be more naive. And I have to say this because I find it astonishing that the US really seems to think that this kind of bizarre strategy is actually going to work. By now, the Russians have worked out that their relationship with Washington is never going to be a relationship based on equality or mutual respect, but they have probably wanted some sign, some indication from the Americans that they will address seriously Russia's concerns in Europe. These focus overwhelmingly and specifically on the issue of Ukraine, where the Russians want to see some kind of movement in achieving the Minsk agreement through direct negotiations between Ukraine and the two republics of the Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. But it also unquestionably means that the Russians also want to see some degree of pullback on the constant push by the United States to expand NATO, to build military bases around Russia, to install anti-ballistic missile interceptors in Eastern Europe, and all the rest. Well, the United States, it's clear, is not prepared to make any concessions on that issue. None at all. Instead, what it's going to offer is lots of money, a massive bribe. I can't help but think that the Americans here have to some extent internalized their own propaganda. I think that they truly believe, that Putin is indeed an incorrigibly corrupt leader of a kleptocratic regime, and that he can somehow be won over with bribes and money. And of course, what's going to happen is that when he says no, as he's certain to do, the Americans are going to go away baffled and angry and unsure what to do, but will probably, after they've recovered, try and hit back in some hard way. It does remind me so much of previous iterations of US-Russia relations since Vladimir Putin became president. I remember that something very similar used to happen in Barrack Obama's time, when Obama and his various officials were trying to persuade Putin to leverage Syrian President Assad out of power in return for all sorts of vague offers of Russia joining the United States in some great campaign, military campaign against ISIS, and the Americans going away baffled and angry when the Russians and Putin himself repeatedly said no. Anyway, this summit is going to shape out into a debacle if this is all that the Americans are coming with. And I suspect that it not only is all that the Americans are coming with, but that the Russians, who have been seriously concerned and very worried about the absence of an agenda, of a clear agenda, or even a proper format of the meeting, are going to come baffled to the summit also. I think they're going to be completely incredulous to be presented with this strange mixture of threats and bribes at the summit meeting. And just as the Americans are going to go away baffled and angry when the Russians say no, which they will, the Russians are going to come away baffled and angry that the Americans have treated them with such extraordinary disrespect as to make this kind of threat and offer to them at a summit like this. Anyway, this all, of course, makes even more clear the points made by the Russian ambassador to China in that interview with Global Times, which I discussed a few days ago. In that interview, the Russian ambassador, Andrei Denisov, reassured the Chinese that if the topic of China was going to be discussed at this summit meeting between Putin and Biden, then the Russians would fully brief the Chinese about everything that the Americans had said to them. And sure enough, we now know that the primary purpose of the summit meeting is indeed to get the Russians to talk to the Americans about the Chinese and to recognize the Chinese as some sort of problem rather than an ally of Russia. I think that the United States needs to start being realistic. I read a tweet recently by the former US ambassador to Russia, Michael McFauls, a person who played an instrumental role in wrecking US-Russia relations during the period of the Obama administration, in which he sneered at the Russians by insinuating that they were putting themselves in a junior position by getting themselves so close to the Chinese. Well, all I can say about that is that obviously China is a far more powerful country at the moment than Russia in every respect, save the military one. But at least the Chinese treat the Russians with a certain degree of respect and with some concern for Russian feelings. How will the Russians compare that kind of treatment with this extraordinary, shabby, almost Al Capone-like treatment in which they're told, either you accept this bribe from us or you get a threat. We carry out all kinds of threats against you. It must seem to them that, in effect, they're being pressured by the Americans to join what is, in effect, a kind of protection racket. And realistically, if the choice is between being junior partner to China or being junior partner to America when confronted with this kind of challenge and threat and bribe, well, I would have thought that for the Russians, it is a no-brainer. You go with the country that treats you respectfully, that shows a regard for you, that takes you seriously, that listens to what you have to say, and which works with you on international affairs and supports you over the issues that concern you. You're not going to go with the country which, on the contrary, treats you with total disrespect, simultaneously threatens you, and tries to bribe you in order to get you to do what it wants. Now, if the summit is going to end in a debacle, it's probably just as well that President Biden has decided to do that which many people did expect him to do, which is cop out of his press conference with President Putin, a joint press conference with President Putin. And in fact, there's a very interesting part, a very interesting section about this press conference situation in the Washington Examiner article. And it's based on comments by a White House official. I don't know which one, I'm not going to guess, but it quotes his words verbatim. And this is what he says, what this official says about the particular issue of the press conference. We expect this meeting to be candid and straightforward, and a solo press conference is the appropriate format to clearly communicate with the free press the topics that were raised in the meeting, both in terms of areas where we may agree and in areas where we have significant concerns. Notice here the words the free press. In other words, the entire point of this exercise of holding a solo press conference as opposed to a joint press conference with Putin and Biden talking together is to avoid a situation where President Biden might be asked questions by the unfree press. In other words, the Russian media and perhaps the Chinese media, which is quite likely to be present at the summit meeting also. Well, that's not entirely unusual. It's been a consistent story of this administration that President Biden doesn't like press conferences, tends to avoid them, and of course he prefers, when he holds press conferences, to keep them very short and to have them very carefully staged and to make sure that the questions he gets asked are questions that he can answer and answer quite easily and simply. Obviously, he does not want to be confronted with difficult questions from a possibly hostile press corps like the one that operates around the Kremlin and which follows Putin on his travels. But, let's put that to one side. I mean, there's no obligation on President Biden to hold a joint press conference with President Putin. I should say that it was not the practice during the superpower summits of the Soviet Union and the United States for the two leaders to hold joint press conferences. So this is not, in that respect, a major break with tradition. But consider these words, the free press, meaning that Russia's press, its media, is unfree. Well, of course, that is what many people in the West believe. That is what many people in the US government believe. But why go out of your way to say it like this on the eve of a summit meeting with the president of Russia? Doesn't that again show a profound disrespect for the country you are supposed to be working with? Well, there it is. It seems to me that if this is going to be a summit meeting between Biden and Putin that is going to follow the agenda that has been set out in this Washington Examiner article, well, it's not going to go very far. No doubt there will be some nice words, perhaps even a few photo ops, but I suspect that behind the scenes, in the private discussions, we understand that there's going to be a small session, which will presumably be the two presidents with their very close advisors, and a larger working group session in which probably more officials like those from the military will attend. Well, I suspect that in those private sessions, there will be very heated and angry words exchanged. So we should certainly not look forward to any kind of breakthrough. And of course, the Russians have been going out of their way to say that they don't expect that there will be any breakthroughs at all. So it looks likely that this summit meeting is going to be a summit meeting in which the Americans are going to attempt to win the Russians over through a mix of threats and bribes, and the Russians will say no, and the two leaders will part, and the situation will continue to deteriorate internationally. I have to say that I think personally that this is sad. I mean, I personally would want to see a genuine improvement in relations between the United States and Russia. This is not because I think there's any prospect of Russia being drawn away from China in any conceivable sense, but it is because I think that trying to improve relations in Europe to stabilize a very tense situation which is developing there is in everybody's interests. I've already discussed in programs some of the very dangerous weapon systems that are starting to appear, like the Russian Poseidon submarine drone, which has such devastating capabilities against the United States. But this summit meeting, if it is going to follow the agenda that we read about in this Washington Examiner article, is not going to make the situation in Europe less tense. It's in the end going to make it more tense. No wonder the Russians are hard at work preparing for the day when they're disconnected from SWIFT. Clearly, if they're getting any signals from the US that the Biden administration is thinking along the lines set out in this Washington Examiner article and in these comments from senior officials, well, if that's the kind of signals the Russians are getting, they must be saying to themselves that a storm is definitely coming. But it must also be said that what I personally regret is going to be welcomed by some people. There are some people around the world who do not want to see an improvement in US-Russia relations. Obviously, there are the usual suspects, the Baltic states, Poland, the present government in Ukraine, a couple of other European politicians, probably the British. There's also, of course, China, which, as far as it's concerned, would rather, no doubt, see relations between Russia and the United States get worse rather than better. I don't think the Chinese seriously worry that their alliance with Russia is in any form of jeopardy. But as far as they're concerned, they would certainly, I think, prefer relations between Moscow and Washington to remain tense rather than to become friendly. But, of course, there are also some people in Washington who are so obsessed with hostility towards Russia and so determined in some ways to overturn the whole nature of the relationship between the US and Russia and to make it as hostile as possible, that they would still welcome, it seems to me, the failure of such a summit meeting, especially if it caused problems for President Putin, and in spite of whatever problems it might cause for the United States in its clash with China. There's been an extraordinary article by a former Trump administration official, Kurt Volker, who used to be the Trump administration's point man in Ukraine, and who is, by the way, a prominent hardliner and neocon, in which he makes it absolutely clear that what he would like to see come out of this summit meeting is no agreement at all, but rather a further deterioration in relations. Well, I'm very sorry to say that perhaps not in the medium term, but in the immediate term, but in the pretty short term, he's going to get what he wants. For the rest, all I am going to say is this. There's been some reports from Moscow that President Putin is now considering a trip to Beijing. The Chinese Communist Party is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. And there's been talk that the Chinese government is particularly anxious to have Putin attend as the guest of honor. Well, all these events, these extraordinary demands that the United States seems to be making of the Russians at this summit meeting, to my mind, make it all but certain that the Russians, Putin, will accept that invitation from China. It seems to me that if you want to see the shape of what is to come, wait a few weeks and watch President Putin in Beijing. Thank you very much for joining me for this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs for this channel. And please also join us on our main channel that you ran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. And please also don't forget to look up Alex's own channel. You find links under this video. Please also check us out on our various other platforms, BitChute, Odyssey, SuperU and Locals. And please also support us via Patreon, PayPal and Subscribestar to the extent that you can. Also, don't forget to look us up on our Discord server, and also to check out our shop and buy yourself the amazing things you will find there. Our famous magic mugs, our amazing t-shirts, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, and all the rest. And thank you for joining me on this program, and I look forward to you joining me on future programs on this channel, and have a wonderful day until then. And by the way, before I go, please don't forget to press the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. And thank you again, and have a wonderful day.